Major developments in the last 2 hours about a first alert investigation we have been tracking for nearly 3 years. Multiple federal charges were just issued following grand jury indictments involving the owners of Summit Contracting Incorporated. It is a De Pere business we first told you about in 2019 when customers told us their bank accounts were emptied by the company and work on their homes never even completed. It is a story Sarah has been following closely ever since. She's live outside the federal courthouse with what just happened. Sarah.
Well, Jeff, a lot has happened since just about 2:30 this afternoon. In short, the owners of Summit Contracting, Chad Shampers, his wife Gina Shampers, Nate Smith, and Jeffrey O'Brien, the lead salesperson for Summit Contracting, all federally charged now with wire and bank fraud. The U.S. Attorney's Office, the federal court here behind me, saying Summit Contracting took or tried to take more than $1.5 million from customers. The indictment returned by a federal grand jury today says Chad Shampers, Nate Smith, Gina Shampers, and Jeffrey O'Brien, a salesperson, carried out a scheme to defraud and obtain money from customers under false and fraudulent pretenses. As customers have been telling us since 2019, the courts allege Summit used high-pressure, deceptive tactics, pushing customers to use two financing companies Summit worked with, EnerBank and GreenSky. But prosecutors say Summit's owners then withdrew funds from customers' accounts before even beginning any work or ordering the necessary building materials. The three owners, plus Jeffrey O'Brien, are also facing 9 other charges of wire fraud as part of this whole operation. Now, on top of these charges, a separate indictment also came down this afternoon for Chad Shampers. He's also being charged with fraud and money laundering, that is, and the U.S. Attorney's Office say he filed a fraudulent loan using the federal Paycheck Protection Program under the CARES Act, the money that was supposed to be used for coronavirus relief. We first told you about that in August of 2020. Those charges also carry very lengthy prison sentences.
This is the breaking news that's been unfolding by the hour. A federal grand jury handing down indictments today against the owners of Summit Contracting Incorporated, alleging 4 people conducted a scheme to take or attempt to take more than $1.5 million from their customers. We have been filing first alert investigations on this company since 2019 when customers came to us asking for help. Sarah Thompson has been talking with them all the way through and investigators ever since. She joins us with what is happening tonight. Sarah.
Cammie and Bill, I can tell you 4 people, Chad Shampers, his wife Gina Shampers, Nate Smith, and Jeffrey O'Brien, will all have to appear here in front of a federal court judge and do it soon. In the meantime, word is spreading fast across the state from people who say they were victimized by Summit Contracting, many of them saying their bank accounts were completely drained or tens of thousands of dollars suddenly went missing. Tonight, the words they say are being uttered, quote, "It's about time." Federal prosecutors use words like scheme and fraud to describe the practices they say Summit Contracting was using in order to get customers to sign documents that would eventually allow the contracting business to almost immediately take money from customers' bank accounts. The federal indictment says Summit used high-pressure, deceptive tactics to get customers to finance home improvement projects with Summit using the company's chosen financial institutions, EnerBank and GreenSky. Prosecutors say often while Summit representatives were still in people's homes for a sales pitch, they would induce a customer to apply for financing by misrepresenting the terms of the financing, alleging customers didn't realize what they were signing. Then, almost immediately, Summit would process, via interstate wires, those financing applications, allowing Summit to withdraw funds from customers' financing accounts prior to ever beginning any work or even ordering materials. The total amount prosecutors say Summit Contracting wrongfully obtained or attempted to, $1.5 million. Along with that indictment came a second one against Chad Shampers, alleging he filed a fraudulent loan application for the Paycheck Protection Program. That's the government's federal coronavirus relief money for people impacted by the pandemic. Instead, prosecutors allege Champers used $300,000 for personal expenses, to purchase a home, or to divert funds into his personal account. And to be clear, this is not about poor workmanship on a contracting job. This is about fraud and deception in the terms of the U.S. Attorney's Office. And that's what takes this, they say, to a criminal level.
This exclusive video of the owners and lead salesman from Summit Contracting all being led into a federal courtroom in handcuffs this morning. This is help is being lined up for people who say they were victimized by Summit Contracting, losing tens of thousands of dollars for work oftentimes never completed by that company. First told you about it yesterday, about the federal indictments and what prosecutors call a scheme to defraud people out of more than $1.5 million.
It is the latest in a first alert investigation we started on Summit Contracting nearly 3 years ago. Sarah Thompson has the exclusive video from court, and the latest on what is now a fast-moving case throughout the court system.
Our cameras were rolling as Nate Smith, one of Summit Contracting's owners, walked into federal court this morning to turn himself in. It didn't take long for all 4 people indicted yesterday by a grand jury on bank and wire fraud charges to be led by U.S. Marshals in handcuffs into a federal courtroom. Chad Champers, his wife Gina Champers, Smith, and Jeffrey O'Brien, Summit's lead salesman, all walked in not uttering a word. While our cameras are not allowed inside federal court proceedings, we did sit inside, watching each person appear individually in front of a judge, their indictment carefully read. Prosecutors allege Summit Contracting used deceptive, misleading tactics to con customers into using 2 specific financing companies Summit was working with. But instead of signing loan applications, prosecutors say Summit was getting customers to sign other documents that almost immediately released money from that financing company and put it straight into Summit's hands. But customers continue to tell us they're still on the hook for paying back loans to those financing companies, even though prosecutors argue work on their homes was never complete, or in some cases, never even started. Chad Champers also faces additional wire fraud and money laundering charges after investigators say he was given nearly $300,000 through the federal Paycheck Protection Program for coronavirus relief, but instead used it for personal gain. In court, all 4 people pled not guilty and were allowed to leave, but did agree to surrender passports and show up for all future hearings. And those will come quickly. Because of speedy trial laws, if the cases go to trial, that would actually happen in just over 2 months from now.
While the case works to move quickly through court, we spent a lot of time today trying to answer questions from victims about what they should do now. Here's what we found so far.
Many of the officials who've been working on this case for the last 3 years will try to answer questions and explain the court process in a meeting next Wednesday night at 5:30 at the Brown County Sheriff's Office. Victim witness staff from the U.S. Attorney's Office are working to notify all victims. Each of the 4 people indicted faces more than $1 million in fines and decades in prison if convicted. An emotional roller coaster. That's how one woman describes the last 48 hours after seeing the owners of former De Pere business Summit Contracting charged in federal court. We first told you Tuesday the former owners, Nate Smith, Chad Champers, and his wife Gina Champers, along with salesman Jeffrey O'Brien, were indicted on nearly a dozen wire and bank fraud charges. Federal prosecutors say Summit Contracting used misleading, deceptive tactics to con customers out of more than $1.5 million. We've been talking with victims repeatedly since 2019 when we aired the first of several First Alert investigations on Summit Contracting. Today in a First Alert exclusive, we hear from one victim who's become the voice for dozens of other victims fighting for justice.
Just full of emotions, tears of joy. I was afraid, I was thankful, I couldn't wait to tell the world.
Mary Klimchek has never really had a problem being vocal about her issues with Summit Contracting Incorporated. After trying for months to resolve problems on her own, Mary called us for the first time back in 2019, telling us her bank account was drained of tens of thousands of dollars and the roof Summit Contracting installed on her Marinette County property was never completely fixed by the company. Once she spoke up, victim after victim after victim started doing the same thing, all sharing similar stories and showing us the paperwork. All people saying they too were victims of Summit Contracting, not just upset about poor workmanship or work not even being completed in the first place. It was financially devastating, they'd all told us.
People have not been able to recover, recoup, or fix their properties. They felt so depressed that I was approached that they were filing bankruptcy.
Klimchek became the voice for other victims, too afraid to speak up, trying to encourage them not to give up year after year.
Just hang in there was the biggest word I could ever say, but that grows old after a while.
Finally this week, when the wire and bank fraud indictments hit federal court, putting in writing the exact same financial problems those victims had been telling us, Klimchek felt relief.
I can only hope that all of you that have been affected, there's light at the end of the tunnel, and none of us are going away.
Questions from viewers continue pouring in about what they should do about fraudulent loans taken out in their names in connection to a now closed contracting business. As we first told you on Tuesday, the former owners and salesperson for Summit Contracting, Chad Champers, Gina Champers, Nate Smith, and Jeffrey O'Brien, have been indicted in federal court on nearly a dozen wire and bank fraud charges. Federal prosecutors say they used deceptive, misleading tactics to get customers to unknowingly take out large loans for home improvement projects, but kept the money for themselves. In the 3 years since we've been airing First Alert investigations, customers continue to tell us those third-party financing companies are still after them for money from those fraudulent loans. In another First Alert investigation tonight, Sarah Thompson finds out one of those companies is in big trouble itself with the government for similar practices all over the country. Sarah.
Bill, I talked to 3 different Summit Contracting victims just this morning who say the financing company Green Sky has been calling them nonstop for 3 years. One victim says she's received 40 phone calls at all times of the day and night in just the last few months. Each person told me they involve fraudulent loans, so they refuse to pay that money back. We found out they are among more than 6,000 people across the country dealing with the same kind of problem, all involving Green Sky. Green Sky labels itself a leading technology company, not a bank, that offers frictionless promotional payment options to consumers, making it fast and easy to get a loan. The government's translation of that? Careless practices that enable merchants to take advantage of vulnerable customers. We found that statement in documents issued in the last 7 months by the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the federal agency that's supposed to make sure banks, lenders, and financial companies treat you fairly. Instead, the Consumer Watchdog Agency found Green Sky, headquartered in Atlanta, Georgia, violated the Consumer Financial Protection Act of 2010. Between 2014 and 2019, it found Green Sky received at least 6,000 complaints from consumers who stated they did not authorize submission of a loan application. The 57-page order says some consumers became aware of the loan for the first time when they saw their credit report or received billing statements, collection letters, and calls from Green Sky. How'd it happen? The Consumer Bureau says Green Sky used a completely paperless application process, making it easy for a contracting company or other merchant to fill out the documents electronically, sitting in a person's home, as long as they had information like name, address, and social security number. Sound familiar? That's what customers of Summit Contracting have been telling us happened to them since 2019. And this week, in those federal indictments filed against the owners and lead salesmen of Summit, Green Sky was again named, alleging that's what the former De Pere business was doing. Several customers have told us they filed complaints and contested paying those fraudulent loans, but nothing has changed. In July, the Bureau said enough, ordering Green Sky to refund and cancel up to $9 million for harmed consumers, pay a $2.5 million penalty, and put steps in place so it doesn't happen again. In a brief notice on its website, Green Sky writes, without admitting liability or wrongdoing, it agreed to pay the civil penalty, provide compensation to eligible customers capped at $3 million, and cancel up to $6 million in loans. Now, this all happened late last summer, but all the victims having issues with Green Sky who've contacted us say they have yet to receive a penny and their credit ratings have still dropped significantly. Now, we reached out to Green Sky today but haven't heard back. Those victims hope that meeting next week with local and federal officials will help fix all these problems.